there are 10 dimensions, and only one of them is work. So no matter how much passion you have for your work, what one should ultimately do is to extrapolate that passion for work and turn it into a passion for life.
Hello, dear friends of Kabbalah Podcast, here again with MarioSaban.
Thank you, shalom to all.
Cheers, Mario.
Thank you, Nacho.
Well, Mario, look, today we have to talk about work, addiction or passion.
This is an important issue.
What do we do with this?
You are talking to someone very unbalanced at work. But my imbalance is passionate.
Right.
So I could justify it. But well, from the Kabbalah point of view, to start somewhere, I think we should start by analyzing the relationship between work and pleasure.
Right.
And not work in relation to self-demand. I believe this is the first point. If we don't analyze it deeply, we have a problem. A person who is working without enjoyment is facing a very serious issue, because they are not fulfilling the purpose of their life. Therefore, the first key point, if someone works in alignment with the purpose of their life, then it becomes a passion. And here's the thing, this brings us to the real question. How do we know when work is truly a passion? Because if you feel passion for your work, it means you are fulfilling the purpose of your life. Now, from the perspective of Kabbalah, we have 10 dimensions in the tree of life. One of them is Malkut, where work is carried out, and the other 9 are not related to work. So, of course, life cannot be reduced to work, even if it is your passion. So what is the problem here? If you take your work to the extreme, even if you're driven by passion, you might not realize it and end up crossing the line into self-demand. In other words, the boundary between passion and self-imposed pressure is a very blurry one. Why? Because when you're passionate, you start working, you stay passionate, you keep working, but after 8, 9, 10 hours of being deeply passionate, you start to feel exhausted, you get tired, and still want to keep working, believing it's your passion. But by then you're already in self-demand. This means there are 2 types of self-demand. One type of self-demand comes from a person who simply doesn't find passion in their work and has to push themselves all day long. And then there's another type, someone who does find passion in their work, but ends up crossing the line when the passion fades and turns into self-demand. In other words, you can reach self-demand precisely by being carried away by your own passion. So, the person who lives in constant self-demand because they haven't found the meaning of their life, this person needs to do some deep reflection and finally discover their true purpose. That's what I think about it. The second type of person has already found the meaning of their life. They feel passion for the work they do. However, they still place demands on themselves at such a level that this self-demand can eventually cause them to lose that passion. So passion also needs limits. In other words, even passionate work must have boundaries, because somehow we need to preserve the passion and not cross over into self-demand. When you're doing passionate work, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3, 8, 9, by the 10th hour, you need to start applying some kind of break. If you don't, you run into a problem. Self-demand might start to take over. So how can we prevent that from happening? Let me give you an example from my own life. Back in the year, I believe it was, the year I did a very long tour across the Americas that lasted 2 months. It was the longest tour of my life, and I think the only one I'll ever do that long. It started in Los Angeles, then I went through Miami, then Mexico, El Salvador. It was incredibly long. And I realized that I was very passionate about the seminars, about everything, but the pace kept increasing and increasing and increasing until I reached Colombia. And in Bogota, on the last day, I was so exhausted, so self-demanding, everything so intense that without realizing it, I hit my foot against a suitcase and broke a toe. So, the first realization was that I was already becoming aware of the self-demand because my own body was forcing me to stop. This was in 2019, and I also decided something very important. In Chile, I had two activities. Generally, people go to a country, stay for 2 days, and leave if they have just 2 events. That's what I had been doing in other countries. In Colombia, I had 4 days and 4 events, or 5 days and 3 events. But in Chile, I had 1 or 2 activities, yet I stayed for a whole week. The way I slept that week in Santiago, Chile was unbelievable. Why? Because I realized that no matter how much passion I had, we have limits.
Of course.
And I had to stop.
You were
I was
exhausted.
exhausted, very, very tired. So that's where my reflection and my conscience begins, so to speak. I had to understand that my passion could not drag me to destruction. That everything has a limit and that you have to set a limit. That's when I became aware of the limit. I set a limit for myself. But from then on, I had the deeply integrated experience that I can be passionate about something and still have to put limits on it, even if it's my passion.
Regarding everything you were saying, I was jotting down some different reflections here. One of them is that it's important to analyze which mechanisms trigger that self-demand, because many times that self-demand is motivated by, for example, a need for recognition. Recognizing these triggers is key to managing self-demand and creating healthier boundaries with ourselves.
Actually, when you have a passion, you go beyond that need for recognition. That is, when you have passion, whether you're giving a talk to 2 people, 200 or 2,000, it doesn't matter because there is an inner passion. Of course, there can be an ego imbalance, especially when you are younger, but over the years you realize that it's a genuine passion, not an ego imbalance. On the contrary, what you want is to be at peace, to be able to study, and not always be in front of an audience, and that peace is what truly sustains and nourishes your passion over time. When you constantly need an audience, I understand that there can be an ego imbalance. But I also understand that there is self-demand that comes from passion itself. It's like passion puts you in an inertial, passionate force, but it reaches a point where at some moment you don't realize it and you start losing the passion because it becomes something you have to do. In other words, you go from being to should be.
You have an obligation.
Like an obligation, and when it turns into an obligation, it becomes something else. In other words, it turns into self-demand. That's why I say, if you want to maintain passion, you have to set limits. Look, I don't practice it myself, but the more orthodox people within the Jewish world observe Nida, the practice of purity by the woman, for 5 days. During this time, there are no relations with the wife 3 days before the Nida. The Nida itself lasts 5 days, plus 3 more days. In total, it's a period of about 12 days. It's a way to preserve balance. And when you often reflect on this, it is so that desire can focus on the other days, and that in some way, gevura, discipline, restraint, is applied to passion in this kind of intimacy. But those of us who feel passion for what we do also have to have that limit. If there is wisdom that sets a limit on the passion of couples intimacy, we also have to set limits on all our passions so that desire is maintained. For desire to last, it must be limited. If it's unlimited, desire disappears. Balance is the key that keeps desire alive and flourishing. Sustainable passion is born from conscious restraint. Therefore, do we want to have that pleasure, that passion, that working in the purpose of our life gives us? Yes, but with a limit. And why with a limit? So that the next day we can wake up with the same passion and not be completely exhausted. That's why I say, we have to set a limit so that self-demand doesn't appear. Of course, there are different cases, and I believe that each person must act according to the nature of their own soul. Some may need it at 5 hours, 6 hours, or 7 hours, depending on the intensity of the work each person does. But the truth is, self-limiting passion is important to keep the passion alive.
Right. We will be back in 15 seconds. Hey Mario, what are you doing waiting for me?
We were supposed to meet at 9 o'clock.
But I've been here since 8:30, Nacho. We have to work.
Well, okay, you're right. We have to get to work. Follow us, join the conversation, and like our content. Discover more about MarioSaban and Kabbalah at MarioSaban.com. Let's continue growing and learning together. I love this podcast. Well, I won't ramble.
Let's get to work.
When you talked about setting limits to passion, it also occurred to me that one of the things limits do is allow us to perceive passion clearly. In other words, that limit lets you perceive passion to frame it within the context of something. And then there's another thought, which is also a reflection and an invitation to myself, related to how you always mention and talk about finding the meaning of life. But often, many people engage in different types of activities. And I think it's also interesting to be able to find the meaning of life in every life experience we have, not only in those we live with passion. Each experience holds its own purpose, even if it's not fueled by passion. Even in tasks that sometimes may seem trivial or superficial, there can still be a hidden meaning in your life when carrying out these administrative tasks or similar things. Recognizing this hidden meaning allows us to find purpose and fulfillment in every action. Even the smallest task becomes sacred.
Sure, for example, when I'm alone at home washing the dishes, I'm happy washing the dishes. And someone might say, well, someone else could do that task. You might be thinking, but I love it, because it's also a moment for reflection and to connect with many things. It's true that I don't like ironing. What can I do? But I do like washing the dishes.
But today I was telling you, for example, about what I had to do, write up that matter for the insurance issue. And you asked me if I had studied law, and I told you no, that my father and grandfather did. Then my wife made me reflect on that. Look, you wrote a report.
Yes.
But here you are using a lot of terminology that has to do with legal issues.
With legal matters. Well, there you have a family fidelity.
Of course, there is a family fidelity that, although it wasn't exactly my passion, I am discovering that there is meaning in it. In other words, there is an existential meaning in this process I'm going through, which at first seems quite tedious to me.
Everything has its meaning, absolutely. Also, when administrative tasks confront you with the limits of reality and you say, well, how boring, I don't like this, it's very bureaucratic, they also lead you to reflect on your own limitations. I don't like doing this because I'm limited, because I don't know how to do it, because, in other words, I believe there is an element of humility in all of this, a kind of simplicity where various administrative tasks are part of the game, so to speak. They are part of everyday life. And by accepting it, we grow and move forward with greater awareness. My wife has a phrase that I really like, which goes, how hard it is to be human, meaning being human in dealing with all the administrative stuff. Personally, Nacho, I think there are several points here. Focusing on passion, which is the purpose of your soul, is fundamental, but it's also essential to set limits. Just like everything we experience in this cosmogonic reality. In other words, as we know, the reality of the cosmos is limited. Since the reality of the cosmos is limited by default, as we might say, everything is limited, and so are we. Because we are limited, we also have to put limits on our own passion. Otherwise, passion will drag us into levels of self-demand that go against ourselves. In other words, I preserve myself in some way through self-nourishment. I want to emphasize again that sometimes it's a matter of experience to know where to set the limit, because often we don't know where to stop. Sometimes we arrive late at the limit, only realizing it after we've passed it, when self-demand has already set in. But over time, as we get to know ourselves better, self-knowledge helps us understand how to set limits for ourselves and also how to set limits for others. The good thing about setting limits for yourself is that it trains you to set limits for others as well. What I would never give up on is having work that relates to the meaning of my life. People often ask me, whether in school sessions or elsewhere, I work in something that is not the meaning of my life, but I've found the meaning of my life and I'd like to work in it. But how do I support my family? I have to spend 8 hours working at a job unrelated to the meaning of my life. I tell them, reserve 2 hours after work for the activity that relates to your life's purpose. When you connect with those 2 hours, outside of the exhausting job that doesn't relate to your life's meaning, you focus on those 2 or 3 hours and your joy and happiness change. Even your routine work feels different because now it gives meaning to your entire life. It's very important that people reserve time to pursue the meaning of their life because from there, several things will arise. First, an overall happiness. Second, which many people don't realize, is that in the medium or long term, what you are working on and developing as the meaning of your life can eventually become a source of income and replace the self-demanding job. Finding balance between passion and limits is essential for sustainable growth. When we align our work with the meaning of our life, joy and purpose naturally follow. Over time, this alignment can transform our passion into a source of both fulfillment and livelihood. And I believe people should become aware of this and therefore connect with what truly is their passion. But I'll say it again, even when people connect with their passion, they must set a limit, because that passion can lead them to an overall imbalance in the dimensions of the tree of life. In the tree of life, each dimension asks for nourishment, asks to be fed, and work is just one of those dimensions, Malkuth, not all of them. Therefore, the other dimensions must also be nourished, which means you have to pause work to be with your family, pause family time to be with your partner, and pause all of them to be with yourself. In other words, there are 10 dimensions, and only one of them is work. So no matter how much passion you have for your work, what one should ultimately do is to extrapolate that passion for work and turn it into a passion for life. Only then can balance give birth to true fulfillment.
There, look, what have I written here?
Life.
Passion for life?
Well, we have synchrony already. Yes, Nacho, we have total synchronicity.
Exactly. That's where your speech was leading me, wasn't it?
The passion for life begins with the passion for work. It's very difficult to feel true passion for your life if you're stuck in self-demand at work, especially because we spend so many hours working. This is my point of view.
Of course.
And as a result, you start to feel drained. In fact, sometimes people use their leisure time as an escape from work. For me, the real test of whether someone is passionate about their work or not is Sunday at 6 p.m. If a person dreads getting up on Monday morning, it's a clear sign they're doing something they dislike or something that isn't their passion. Personally, I'm the happiest person in the world on Sunday at 6 p.m. because when your week begins with purpose, even Sunday night feels like a doorway to joy, not a countdown to dread. Because on Monday my delight begins.
I thought you were going to say because I watch soccer.
No, but that's when my delight begins. In fact, it continues because I'm doing the same thing on Sunday. What I mean is, I'm in a state of delight. Now, I'm not addicted to work, but I'm deeply connected to my passion. So, what do? Of course, I set limits for myself so that it doesn't become an addiction. And it's not impossible. But on Sunday night, I'm the happiest person in the world. And I would say to anyone listening, if you feel depressed on Sunday night, there's your answer. The answer lies between 6 and 10 p.m. on Sunday, which, as we know, is sadly the time when the highest number of suicides occur worldwide. Setting boundaries is not just an act of self-love. It's a way to preserve the joy of being alive.
Oops, I was going to use the same concept.
Exactly. If every Sunday evening brings anxiety, dread, or sadness, it's not just Sunday blues. It's a sign that something fundamental is out of alignment. You owe it to yourself to either change your work or reconnect with something that gives your life real meaning, because no one should end the weekend in despair. That time should be the doorway to purpose, not the prelude to suffering. I mean, you have to tell people the truth. You can't lie to them. You're not okay. Because those of us who are in the world of Kabbalah, between 6 and 10 o'clock on Sunday night, we are happy that Monday is starting. Happy that Monday is starting because we are engaged in the activity that makes us happy. So there is no shift. That's why, look, it's like the concept of a party. When do people need a party? Those of us in the world of Kabbalah don't need a party. We are celebrating all the time.
Tell that to my wife.
But I say it sincerely from the heart. We are celebrating all day long. So if someone invites me to a party, I say, how boring, I have to go to a party, if I'm already living in a celebration all day. Now, who actually likes to go to a party? The one who is bored every day, exactly. You know what? On Saturday, they have a party. And do you know why they're happy? Because Monday is tough, Tuesday is tough, Friday is tough, and the person has to wait until Friday at 3 p.m. or Friday at 6 p.m.
And he makes catharsis.
to get to the party. So party the party in an awesome way. I don't need that kind of party. So when you come to realize that your life is a party, you are in Kabbalah. Because true celebration is not an event, it's a state of being. For me, my life is the party.
That's a good slogan, Mario.
I didn't say it as a slogan, but I said it for an honest reality. I didn't say it for a slogan.
I use the concept of a slogan because it nicely wraps up that phrase, not so it can be used for marketing.
The truth is that all of us who work in Kabbalah feel this. I don't say it just for myself, but for all the people involved in Jewish spirituality, raising their level of consciousness,
Of course.
better understanding reality, seeking, opening jojma, setting boundaries, and living. The perception changes in an impressive way, and people don't know how to be grateful. Because in the end, people say, how can someone live so happily? There are pessimistic realists who say, no, you're deceiving yourself. Well, imagine the following situation. I deceive myself. You know what? Fine. I'll deceive myself with the best one, with the best self-deception. If all subjectivity is a distortion of reality, I choose the distortion that suits me best.
That makes
is
you
happy.
happy.
So, well, that's fine, because many radical pessimists will say, you distort reality. And don't you? We just choose two different distortions. You choose the distortion of pessimism, I choose the distortion of happiness.
Well, there is also a way to evaluate what kind of distortion one has. If that distortion is self-destructive or destructive towards others, then we have a problem.
Of course, but what I mean is that when you connect with happiness, and someone else comes along and wants to ruin your happiness and take you out of that state and says your happiness is a distortion, I say perfect, what I do is this. God gave me several distortions, among which He gave me the distortion of happiness, and I choose the distortion of happiness. What does it matter if it's distorted? If it's giving me emunah, faith, it's giving me confidence. And I don't think it's distorted because when you go to nature, you realize that everyone wants to survive. And survival means life has value. It's not just a biological value, it's a value with meaning.
It's interesting that you use the concept of distortion because distortion can have some analogy with sound. Sound is a vibration, right? So I believe there are vibrations that are more harmonious with the source, let's say, with the origin, with the Ein Sof, and others that are not so much.
Well, let's see. If we analyze the concept of dimension, a dimension compared to another is like a distortion because it lowers the energy. Then, when you try to balance that dimension, it is the least possible distortion within the dimension. Because where are the distortions? In the klipo, the extremes. The imbalances of a dimension are the distortions.
Because you start to alter the frequency.
So we in Kabbalah know very well what distortions are. They are our imbalances. That means I don't want some radical pessimist coming to tell me you're distorting reality because of your happiness. No. Look, I am in a process of constant rebalancing of the dimensions, and I know what distortions are. Distortions lead to imbalance.
Well, but let's also clarify that a radical optimist is also a distorted person,
Yes,
right?
but the thing about Kabbalah is that it is neither optimistic nor pessimistic. It's a realistic optimist, which is a very rare thing because realists in general say that in order to be realistic, they are pessimists. That is to say, pessimists say that they are realists and that's why they are pessimists. And in Kabbalah, we say we are optimists because we are realists.
I agree with that.
So that's where we know how each person is viewing reality. How are we perceiving reality between pessimism and optimism? How is it that in Kabbalah we say, we see reality and become optimistic, while others say, I see reality and become pessimistic. And we are operating in the same reality as far as I know. Well, there are realities that are harsher than others at the family level, etc. But what I mean to highlight is that we are subjects and not seeing the general worldview of the Ein Sof, that is, of the entire infinite, because in the end, the only thing that has no distortion is something that is not limited. That Ein Sof, which can see everything, is the only thing without distortion. We exist in time and space, and therefore, due to our own limitations, we distort reality, and reality gets distorted for us. It is our own limitations projected onto reality that distort it. So, if I project and what comes out is pessimism, then I say, this projection doesn't serve me. I have to have a different projection to live happily. Well, assuming there is a willful decision to work toward being happy. Because for me, the pessimist is the one who has given up on that possibility. This means that I understand the realistic optimist as the one who works, and the realistic pessimist is the one who doesn't want to work to get out of that state. I believe there is a big difference there. Happiness is the result of conscious effort, of choosing the projection that uplifts rather than the one that resigns. Happiness is work, and the pessimist has not done it. They haven't done the work of changing their perception. Even if they criticize that we have distorted reality, they haven't done the work. To be happy, you have to work for it.
That's right. Well, Mario, we will continue next time.
God willing.
God willing. Thank you.